afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Very warm welcome to you all here at the day of the present in the Impakt Festival 2015, the future of the past. As you might have read, we've been cutting up these 3 festival days here in Theater Kikker into the temporal sets of the past, which was yesterday, the present, which is today, and the future, which is tomorrow. And as we were going over the exact same sequence this morning, we understood that this is the only day, actually, that it makes complete sense. We're excited to present this panel on colossal data, a name that we kind of came up with in search of a better word for big data. The amounts of information that are so vast and illegible that we are yet to find out how we will deal with them. How are these capturings of data influencing what we understand of civil society, and how will they maybe become an archive for the future? For this panel, we've invited Anne Helmond, Klaas Kuitenbrouwer, who will moderate the event, Kristoffer Gansing, and Fernando van der Vlist. I'm going to briefly introduce Klaas, who will take it away. Klaas is a researcher, writes and teaches and develops programs on the intersections of technology and culture. He's a researcher and curator to het Nieuwe Instituut Rotterdam. He's a teacher at the Rietveld Academy, an incredible improvisator of free music, amongst other things. Please help me welcome this panel and Klaas Kuitenbrouwer.
Thank you, Ilga. Yes, today what we will be talking about is data. That we may also use another word for, that already was mentioned during lunch just now, but we'll get to that. And it's the questions like it's the reasons for capturing data, the effects of capturing data, and maybe unforeseen consequences of social, political, cultural, and historical nature. Before we start with a short film by Theo Telkom, I want to briefly introduce you to the speakers of today, which are Anne Helmond, assistant professor of the UvA, who wrote a PhD dissertation on the web as platform, which is actually all about data policies, the policies by which social media platforms transform data online into something, that is maybe something we're not entirely sure of what it is, how it actually works, but this is what the PhD is about. Kristoffer Gansing, who is director of the Transmediale Festival in Berlin, which is all about, it's not, sorry. Who will talk about the world as archive, the world, actually the same things that I've been just saying. Sorry, I lost it here. And the blind spots that maybe, so capturing as a kind of practice that is happening all around us continuously, but also what is not captured, blind spots in big data. And last speaker will be Fernando van der Vlist, who is also working at the UvA as a lecturer, but next to his theoretical work is also a designer. So he takes these topics from both a practical and a theoretical aspect. I'm very curious to know what you will be bringing to the table. The program is intersected by 2 movies. The first one we are about to see, and it's called Simulacra by Theo Telkom, and later on we will be watching You, the World and I by, what was his name? John Raffman, of course. Thank you very much. Simulacra by Theo Telkom. was beautiful. Anne Helmond, who will talk about the hyperlink as analytical device, which is part of your one chapter or maybe a selection of your PhD dissertation, the web as platform. Please.
So, thank you very much for having me today. And today I would like to talk about the role of the infrastructure of social media platforms in creating and collecting massive amounts of data, and also what this means for memory practices of the web itself, and also what kind of histories we can then write with the web. So in my research, I analyzed the extension of social media platforms into the web and its consequences, or what I refer to as the platformization of the web, to examine how social media has changed the web's infrastructure. And I developed this notion of platformization to, on the one hand, refer to the rise of the platform as a dominant and infrastructural and economic model of the social web, and also the consequences of the expansion of social media platforms into other online spaces, such as websites or apps, through the use of social buttons, as you can see here, for example. So I argue that this notion of platformization rests on two related dynamics. So first, the expansion of social media platforms into the web, and second, simultaneously, their drive to make external web data platform ready. So as an infrastructural model, social media platforms provide a technological basis or framework for others to build on, and also to use platform features, such as social buttons, on external websites. And this infrastructural model is geared toward connecting to other websites and then collecting their data. And then central to the economic model of platforms is to transform this external web data into formats that allow it to be integrated into the databases of social media platforms for further data processing, data analysis, algorithmic recommendations, personalized advertising, and other uses. And these two processes of, on the one hand, decentralizing these platform features and re-centralizing platform-ready data characterize what I call the double logic of platformization. And it is through very specific platform features that platforms can expand into the web, but also create data channels for collecting and formatting external web data to fit the underlying logic of the platform. And this is enabled by the interplay between the platform, but also webmasters who then implement specific platform functionality, such as by putting social buttons onto their websites. And also, of course, web users who are engaging with these platform features on these websites, for example, by liking or tweeting pages. So let me demonstrate how this works with an example. So what platforms then actually do to the web can be illustrated by looking at, for example, the hyperlink, actually the oldest core element of the web. And it's often considered to be the basic infrastructural element of the internet, or actually the fabric of the web. It's what weaves the web together. So while Tim Berners-Lee, who's considered the father of the web, envisioned the link as a reference with no implicit or explicit meaning, nor representing a specific endorsement, devices such as search engines and social media platforms have taken up the hyperlink to create a variety of relations and different kind of meanings. And they've also reconfigured the hyperlink to actually fit the purposes of their own platforms. So if we remember that the design of the hyperlink was a neutral object, Google, for example, really fit the hyperlink into its own purposes by turning the link into the currency of the web, thereby establishing what author Jill Walker refers to as a so-called link economy. And in this economy, not all links have equal value, because PageRank, which is Google's algorithm for ranking websites in their search engine results, then calculates the relative value of a website. And thereby, search engines have contributed to what Joseph Turow calls the industrialization of the hyperlink through the automatic indexing, processing, and value determination of links. So once considered a general feature of the web, Google turned it into a commodified object that can be traded or sold because it has a particular value. And today I would like to discuss how social media platforms have developed techniques to render the good old hyperlink from a way of navigating the web, of weaving the web together, into a device for data collection. So back in the early days of the web, like the 90s, we had to manually create our own hyperlinks and manually code those hyperlinks between websites. However, with the introduction of content management systems and blog software, there came more automated ways of linking. And here I would like to draw attention to the role of social news websites such as Red and Dick, who developed and introduced what we now call so-called social buttons, as an automated way to create links between websites and those platforms, by turning the link into a device for automatically submitting and receiving data from and to external websites. And here you can actually see part of the HTML code of, for example, an article on the Huffington Post website, which has a set of these social buttons. And these lines of code actually indicate a data channel between the Huffington Post website and the social media platforms. And in the source code, you can already see that the link of the article that can then be shared on Facebook or Twitter is already displayed and embedded. So clicking on one of these social buttons then automatically creates a link between the website and Twitter and Facebook through so-called pre-configured platform links. So this practice of link sharing does not only contribute to the further automation of linking practices, but these buttons also set up data channels for data collection and data exchange, where social media platforms can then also connect user activities such as liking, tweeting, and sharing to other types of data that they collect about these users in their databases. So in the social web, or Web 2.0, or what Tim O'Reilly, who popularized this term of Web 2.0, refers to as the web as platform, websites are actually more like database applications, where these links in social buttons actually function as ways to connect to the databases of social media platforms. So this is a little bit of a technical sidestep, which I find myself very interesting, but it's how most social media platforms actually offer so-called APIs, or which stands for Application Programming Interfaces, which provide developers with a way to access a platform's data and functionality. So for example, if you're a researcher and you want to retrieve Twitter or Facebook data, you will then need to address the Twitter or Facebook API and send specific requests to get the data from these platforms. And these APIs are also used, for example, to enable the functionality of these so-called social buttons. So this Twitter button, for example, communicates with the Twitter API, for example, to get the number of tweets. So that's why this number is able to continuously update, because it sets up a data connection with the Twitter platform through these so-called APIs. And it also enables, when I click the button, that it sends information back, so the number gets automatically updated. And of course, it then also knows, if I'm logged into Twitter, that it's actually me tweeting this information. So technically, these social buttons that enable the automated sharing of links are not hyperlinks, but they're so-called API calls into those platform databases that then enable data exchanges, where the hyperlink itself is just one of the many, many fields of information in this database, which also, for example, includes the number of people who have tweeted it, or more demographic information about me as a user who has tweeted this link. And such automated forms of linking through social buttons, which set up these channels for data exchanges, have been further enriched by social media platforms by reusing or repurposing an already existing new type of hyperlink, the so-called short URL or the short link, as an automated device for information harvesting. So while the idea of making links shorter goes back to 2001, their mainstream success is often attributed to Twitter, because the Twitter platform has a character limit of 140 characters. So you can imagine if you would tweet a very long link of a Huffington Post article, you would hardly have any characters left in your tweet. So that's why users would start to shorten their links so they would have more characters to actually write a comment about this link. So these shortening services do not technically change the link, but rather they create an alias for it. So they produce an extra link on top of it, which then redirects to the original long link. So as a consequence, link shortening services produce an additional layer of short URLs on the web. So on the one hand, we still have all the long links, but then they are all redirected through the short links. And then there are two types of these kind of link shortening services. On the one hand, we have general purpose shortening services where, for example, Bitly is a very big one that I will talk about more in a second. But most importantly, social media platforms also use their own site-specific shortening services. Where, for example, YouTube, if you share a video from YouTube elsewhere, it will automatically create this YouTube short URL. Facebook has one, Twitter has one, and basically all major social media platforms and search engines use their own platform-specific URL shorteners, because that enables them to gather additional user data. So they very often integrate these URL shorteners also into the social buttons, so that every time you press a social button, it automatically creates a short URL of the link. So let me show you how this works. So for example, when I want to share this Huffington Post article on the refugee crisis on Twitter, when I click this tweet button, because of the information that's already pre-configured in there, it will automatically create this tweet for me, which displays the title of the article and also a link to it. So this button then automatically already creates the whole tweet, including the link. But there's actually more happening in the backend than we see here when I use this tweet button. Because this is how the tweet actually then appears if a user posts it in the Twitter interface. And you can see the Huffington Post link in there. And it still looks like this long Huffington Post link, except there are a couple of dots to shorten it in the interface. However, in the meantime, the Twitter platform infrastructure has done something else to the link. Because you can only use 140 characters, Twitter shortens every single link that's posted to its platform. So every time it creates a new additional platform-specific short link from every link being posted. And Twitter has its own URL shortener, which is called t.co, which you can see over there. Yeah. And so every time you post a link, it also creates a short link, a unique short link for it. And this link then enables Twitter to actually track also where this link is being shared, who is sharing this link, when, and who is clicking it, for example. So here I have an example of another link shortening services to also show you the kind of data that these services collect. So Bitly is one of the biggest general purpose shorteners, which handles more than 10 billion short URLs per month. So that's the kind of volume that we have to think about here. And here you can see the different types of information that this service can gather from those people using these services. And this is just the free stuff that's available. So if I would pay, I would get even more detailed demographic data about people shortening their links. So what kind of insights can then be gained from this type of data? And this is an example of Berkeley University, who explored political bias by analyzing the media links shared through this service, Bitly. So while some of the findings might not necessarily be surprising, for example, that Fox News is very popular in Texas, it also revealed that, for example, The Guardian is actually more widely clicked, shared, and read in New York than, for example, the New York Times itself. So this shows what kind of data can be gathered actually from these short URLs. So the implications are that the hyperlink is no longer just a navigational device that points from A to B for you to surf the web, but it has also become a tool to capture user data. So by creating links with T.co, it enables Twitter to make this shared data on its platform algorithm ready by reconfiguring the hyperlink to actually fit the purpose or the economic purpose of the platform, and also in order to become part of algorithmic systems behind Twitter that rank and sort content. So with the platformization of the web, the link has become a way to capture user data. So the process of platformization is important to study because these platforms are actually reformatting the web for the purposes of social media platforms. So they actually are readjusting core elements to fit the underlying economic logic of their platforms. So they are changing core aspects of the web's infrastructure, such as the fabric of the web, through hyperlinks, by creating and adding additional layers of short URLs that are produced by sharing and linking practices of social media platforms. And this has a number of consequences for the web. So first of all, social media platforms are producing an additional infrastructure which enables the gathering of data and the tracking of users, which makes users traceable. Second and third, which I'll discuss in a second, social media platforms and general link shorteners are establishing themselves as intermediaries in typical web activities such as liking and sharing, in order to derive value from these activities and their associated data flows. And also this comes, as I'll go into briefly, with possible issues of archiving, the volatility of links, and link censorship. And this may pose a serious risk also for the future historical research, as links in the social web become more volatile, as more actors actually become involved in the production of links. If a URL shortener, for example, goes out of business, all links break and we can no longer go from A to B. So first of all, the geopolitics of these types of infrastructure. So I was talking about URL shortener Bitly, which is located on the top level domain of .le, which is actually stands for the country code of Libya. So this actually shows how, for example, this popular URL shortener also comes with geopolitical issues. As the TLD.li belongs to Libya, which is currently an unstable political country, this comes with a number of consequences. And I would like to address two here. So the first one is that besides Bitly, a number of other people have also registered their own URL shortening services on this domain. And one of them is, was registered by Violet Blue, vb.le, which was a so-called sex-positive URL shortener. So it was used to actually, to actually shorten links to sex-positive articles, and it has a very particular focus. But as you can imagine, this was located on the .le domain. It was actually at one point, once the government found out, it was ordered to close down by the Libyan Telecom and Technology LLT in Tripoli, because of course they didn't allow nude pictures to circulate on their .le domain. So while they cannot actually censor the content of that particular website, they did have the authority to revoke the URL or to revoke the .le, so it could no longer be accessed, and thereby also vanished. The accessibility vanished online. The second issue is, of course, related to Bitly, the big URL shortener. which was at one point also during the Libyan war at risk of actually no longer functioning. Because once the Libyan internet would shut down, the risk of this URL shortener going down was there as well. And if we imagine Bitly resolving over 10 million or 10 billion URLs per month, it would actually have a big impact on the accessibility of the web itself. And then finally, this also has serious implications for web historiography, or writing histories of the web. So link shorteners can shut down, or they can sell their data, as well as the information about the redirects. So if a URL shortener goes down, potentially billions and billions of links on the web will break. And this may cause black holes when trying to reconstruct previous states of the web. Or these link shorteners may end up in the hand of spammers, who can then redirect all the links to their own website for their own gain. So this is why the URL team sees URL shortening as what they call a fucking awful idea, and sees them as a very serious threat to the internet's integrity. And this is why the archive team, whose Jason Scott is actually giving a keynote tomorrow, which I'm very, very excited about, is dedicated to creating backups of these types of URL shorteners, so that even if a URL shortener goes down and disappears, we at least have the redirection path to the original link, so we know what the link actually once pointed to. So thereby, these kind of initiatives are very important, I think, also for maintaining the possibility to actually write histories of the web. Thank you.
Thank you very. Yeah. Thank you very much, Anne Helmond, for a very concise and very clear talk, which points to an immediately historical issue that we're confronted with. Does anybody here now already have a question to Anne? Otherwise, we'll save them up to the end. No? I have one short question that maybe we will get back to in the end, I guess. Underneath the URL shorteners and underneath these platforms, of course, the web still exists. Or is this a representation of a situation that is not correct? I mean, yes, as an infrastructure it exists, as a URL structure, the original URL structure still exists, but can we then still access it? Is it so? How's the dynamics between let's say the underlying web and the platforms on top of it, and the URL shorteners as politics in between? Maybe this is too big a question, but maybe a very quick entry. Yeah.
Then I'll try to make it very small.
Yeah.
So, for example, of course, the long links or the things that they're pointing to still exist. So those don't disappear. But the thing is that the short links are also shared on other platforms. So people are then starting to share all these short links. So then the original entry point becomes this short URL. So if that, for example, is embedded in an article on the news website and not the original one, then that link breaks. So it actually duplicates the volatility of the infrastructure.
Can you explain the word volatility here? It usually also means kind of a highly contested sphere. It's something where a lot of strife is happening. Is that what you mean, or are you talking more about pure dynamics?
I'm talking here about the dynamics. Like if things break, then we can no longer surf or navigate the web as it's supposed to be.
Then just one to round this off. This underlying structure of the web is also still captured, right? This is also what, I mean, at least the Google bots crawl. This underlying link structure to which the URL shorteners point to. This is all still.
Well, Google is happily crawling the web, except it's now encountering problems, of course, with Facebook and Twitter. So in that sense, that's another question of black holes. But indeed, like crawlers are now also having problems with the kind of things they can index, because increasingly things are behind authentication mechanisms.
This is a question about dependencies that I'm sure we'll get into later more. Okay. Thank you very much for now. Yeah. Yes,
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Fernando van der Vlist. I'm not sure if I should hold two mics here. is Fernando van der Vlist, you're a researcher in the field of study of new media and digital culture, lecturer at the Department of Media Studies of the University of Amsterdam, and what you call a concept-driven information designer. Is that data visualization and such, or is it a broader practice? You will talk about this. Yeah.
It's information design. It's information design, yes.
It sounds like I'll get to that. It's a very interesting notion. You research various relationships between software, digital media, and the social and cultural formations that we are part of and actually performing through these media. I have no idea what you will be talking about other than this introduction, so I'm very curious. Please take the stage. Yeah.
So first of all, let me also thank the organization for inviting me here today. I think this is a wonderful event. For one of the reasons is that indeed, as Klaas also mentioned, I'm both a designer and also lecturing at the university. So I have these two hats that I sort of alternate between. On the one hand, I'm a designer. On the other hand, I'm theorizing about the stuff that we design in digital media spaces. So today I want to talk to you about, actually, I'm going to take the title of this panel quite literally. So colossal data on the one hand and the present, and how do we actually deal with data on a very practical level. And more specifically, I'm going to talk about how do we deal with detecting structures in streams. So if you think about streams, you know, we all know them, we all use social media platforms, or at least most of us do. So we face these streams on a daily basis. But how do we actually deal with the data that they contain and produce? And I'm going to do that in 3 steps. On the first step, I want to go into a little bit the definition of big data, and also related maybe to the term colossal data, which I think is a sort of interesting alternative, but I also want to critique that maybe. And the second point is that I want to talk to you about modeling. So 2 ways for detecting latent structures. And I'm going to explain what that means and why that is relevant. But these 2 things that I'm going to discuss are called modeling bursty streams and probabilistic topic modeling. So I'm not going to go into too much technical detail, but I do want to talk about them in more general terms, and maybe we can discuss them then later also in the discussion. And then I want to move a little bit towards also the topic of prediction, especially with regards to event detection and how they might relate to each other. Because I think a lot of these things are very difficult to distinguish between in practice. So first of all, big data as a phenomenon. I mean, I think big science probably was the first to start really collecting big, huge amounts of data. And that's actually where this first distinction comes from, this idea of, on the one hand, having this confirmatory data analysis mode, where you really try to capture data with the intention of trying to prove or support some hypothesis that you might have. And I think the perfect example here is the Large Hadron Collider, right, where you collect endless amounts of data just to prove that, for example, a Higgs boson particle might exist or not. And on the other hand, you have this exploratory mode, which kind of pops up in the 60s, and it's actually something that you see much more of right now in today's world. So it's interesting to pose that question. Why is that? Where you explore data sets with the idea of trying to develop new hypotheses. So what can we actually do with all the data that is available to us? And this has even hailed some people to call the end of theory. So Chris Anderson. But is that actually true? So in industry, big data is something that, you know, especially companies like Facebook, Amazon, Twitter, what it is about is not just big data getting bigger and bigger. I mean, data has always been growing in size. So that's not necessarily the only important thing here, I think. We had big data 5 years ago as well, but what has changed in the meantime is that a lot of these data that we are capturing is getting much more granular. So much more specific to the level of the individual, which enables then in turn, you know, optimization, personalization, and the creation of new markets, making decisions all at the level of the individual. So you can now target individual people with your advertisements rather than just, you know, types of people. And that's really a significant difference for especially big data science. So this has created, this phenomenon, big data phenomenon, has created two kinds of users. On the one hand, you have the scientific users, and the idea there is really to try and prove a point, create fundamental knowledge, prove hypotheses. And on the other hand, you have the sort of managerial position. So that's where we try either to seek profit, we try very practical answers like predictions that are really useful often in the short run. And there often it's good enough to have data that might be incomplete. It might be a sample. And so big data is also something that we do. It's not just something we have in databases stored there, something to work with. It's also actually a set of practices, a set of people working with big data, dealing with big data quite literally. And that also means that big data is actually still a science in the making. So if we want to sort of still intervene in that process of what kind of science are we making with big data, then we have to also do that now. There is a momentum to that. And at the same time, big data is also a challenge, a problem. So computer science has traditionally had this notion of big data for years, for decades. And it's always been a problem. If big data grows, then also the methods that you use also get less efficient, and that's important for computer scientists because they think in terms of resources. So space is limited, time is limited, energy is limited. So how do you make the most of that? How do you optimize those things? So if data gets bigger, then that tends to be a bad thing. So you throw away big data just to be able to do things fast enough. Especially in online context, that's of course really relevant. If we do a search query on Google, then we want that result as soon as possible. We're not going to wait 10 seconds. So how we actually deal with those questions, how do we face them, that matters because we develop specific methods for those things. And I want to really get into those things. I want to study the specificity of those methods and why that would matter, both the conceptual content of those techniques as well as the, let's say, material content of those techniques, so how they're actually programmed. So it's impossible to analyze all of the data. That's a given. You cannot, study everything. So you have to make decisions. And that's something you do only when you have sort of an idea of the value of particular data. You can't just throw away stuff because then you might also throw away the good stuff, and you don't want to throw away the good stuff. So in order to decide what is relevant and what is not, you have to make some sort of prioritization. And that's what we see in all kinds of spaces, especially in streams, right? There's so many news stories up there at any given point in time that we have to make decisions there. What do we show and what do we don't show? And here again, this idea of granularity is relevant because the more we know about an individual, the more we can also sort of prioritize for that individual. And that's of course also a problem in itself, as we know with someone like Eli Pariser, who has coined this notion of the filter bubble. So if we keep suggesting people with the same things to the same people, then they will sort of end up in that sphere where they won't leave their own interests. So how do you avoid that problem? So streams are a key media object here. They gather all these data streams, these data points that we are making and collecting. And they also shape this sort of experience that we have of social media because they are central to these platforms. If you use a platform like Twitter, then you start reading these posts and they disappear if you refresh, right? Because the new things keep coming in. And that happens at a fast and faster pace. So there's also an experiential side to that stuff. So what kind of an object is a stream then, and what social formations does it organize? Who's competing to be on the top of that stream? What does it take to get there? Do you need to pay them? Do you need to post interesting content? And then what is interesting content? How do you make people click those things? All these practices then suddenly aggregate around those objects. So streams are both emblematic and also central to social media. And they represent really this pulse, this idea of a heartbeat, right? How do we actually use these platforms? And the more we do so, the faster this heartbeat can also occur. And that is in itself something interesting. I'm going to get back to that when I'm starting talking about modeling as well. So by structuring data on a temporal dimension, which a stream essentially is, it structures data by time, that also enables and constrains particular analytical modes. So you can do some kinds of analysis, but you can do other kinds of analysis. What is that space? And so why are we interested even in deriving structures from streams, right? Why is that even a question? And here I just collected as one single quote with, I don't know, maybe 15 different reasons to do so. For example, people might be interested in getting advice, opinions, facts, or updates about news and events. Companies might use Twitter, in this case Twitter, to advertise or recommend products, brands, services, to build, maintain relationships with customers, analyzing sentiment, respond to consumer complaints, and so forth. And even, monitoring terrorist activities and crime prediction. So all these extremely different things come together around this object, around this stream. And still, somehow, we use the same methods in these different application spaces. So they are mobile in a way. They travel across these spaces. So you can sort of deal with this in any number of ways, but two of them I want to focus on a little bit more. And one of these is modeling bursty streams. So this is an idea that John Kleinberg has mentioned in 2002. He's a mathematician, and he developed this idea that data streams have an explicitly temporal character. That's his observation, and therefore the pace at which we post things or post things about particular objects, about particular topics, is in itself valuable to use in order to prioritize some content over others, or even just derive some sort of idea of what that structure is about, without still going into the content. So that's two different layers, the structure and the content. You don't need to read the post in order to structure it. And so what he does is he exploits inter-arrival gaps. So the time between a single post and a second post. These might be on the same topic, these might be on different topic. And he gives this example of email. So he has an email inbox, and he has thousands of emails, and they come in at different rates. And there might be a few months where there's a lot of activity around a particular grant proposal, for example, or a particular talk that he's going to give. So more activity will take place around that moment in time. Whereas 3 months later, so after that event, he might not receive any emails about that. So there's a structure to that, and he's going to use, and he wanted to use that to try and derive a hierarchical structure of what is actually going on in that data. So this model assigns a burstiness value. So this idea that events burst, they are active and then they sort of flat out, which is based on the relations between incoming text or documents in a stream. So not the content, but the relations between them. You need multiple pieces of content, pieces of data in order to get this value, this latent value. This means that latency of the structure is embedded not in the content, but in the structure of the data itself. So again, key point. And so here you can see actually an example of that phenomenon, right? The different documents are clustering based on the fact that they contain the same keywords. So they might be about the 2010 Chile earthquake, or they might be about the Vancouver Olympics. And because they are about the same topic, they contain the same keywords, they are being clustered together. And then when you do that, you see that there are sort of bursts of events, some of which are more important, some of which are less important. Maybe there's even a subcluster to a bigger topic. So grant proposals might be a big topic, and then a sub-project of that might be a single proposal that you're doing. So that hierarchical structure is a sort of stack and SEPinet model. And another model that you might think about is dynamic topic modeling. In this case, latent Dirichlet allocation. So that means that you count words in a particular, how prevalent is a given word across a set of topics. So you have multiple topics, but how important is any one of these topics in relation to all the others? So you create a distribution. And then you use that distribution to then, when new documents come in, either point them into one category or another. So you have existing themes, topics, and you can add new ones if new ones would pop up. And so you can structure that probabilistically without even knowing what the content is about. Again, so you don't need to know the content is again a key point here. And there are many of these methods, right? So LDA detects structure by analyzing the frequency with which a keyword appears in a document, and then iteratively goes through that process to sort of create an emergent categorization of topics. So as data comes in, you can keep using that technique. It's not a static thing. And that's, of course, important if you're studying streams. So these methods are, again, constrained by that fact. Modeling topics dynamically means that we are able to deal with data as it comes in continuously. And in combination with burst analysis, you can also sort of aggregate these methods, chain them, and then you can even think of bursts of topics and events, not just of keywords, which is not necessarily the same if you have bad keywords. So to move sort of further now, event detection as something to monitor and analyze rich continuous flows of incoming data. How do you sort of find the event in the incoming data? So there's a lot of noisy data. We talk about nothing online, and then every now and then there's a tweet about something that is actually an event. So how do you filter these two things? And that is a field of work that draws together techniques from all over. So it's also an organizing phenomenon. It draws together different sciences, so inferential statistics, mathematics, machine learning, computer science, somehow all these things coming together to solve a single problem. And there are two different types of detection tasks historically. So this is a thing that has been existing for 10 years now, or even more, 15 years, even though we are only now actually still using it. So on one hand you have this retrospective mode, and on the other hand you have this new mode, new event mode. So in the case of a retrospective event, you know what the event is. You can query it. So it's a past event. But in the case of a new event, you don't know it yet. So it is still coming in. It's something in the future. You don't know it yet. But the interesting thing is that you have to detect it in the present. Detection is something you do in the present. It's not something you do in the future. It's not a prediction. So that involves continuous monitoring. And then there are two types of events, specified and there are unspecified events. So for specified events, you can query something. For unspecified, you can't. You don't know what the actual event is, which is slightly different. No information about the event is known. So in those cases, you need to sort of have these models that you can use to derive those topics. So how do you distinguish those meaningful and not meaningful stuff? So there are trends, but some trends are just simply non-event stuff. They don't matter. They are about not real events, or they are about just people retweeting each other. They might be simply an online phenomenon, and if you are predicting a real-world phenomenon, then you might not be interested in that. So you need to filter those. Again, make distinctions between stuff that not necessarily are clear in the data itself. And so surprisingness is another way to sort of try and see why something would be more relevant than something else. So again, prioritizing. If something is more surprising than something else, then you can use that to bump it up, rank it higher. So it can work as of a feature. So the surprisingness of a feature. So a new event comes up, and it's either surprising because you don't know it yet, or it's not surprising because you have seen it before in the data. It's already there. If it is surprising, then it can work as an index or proxy for newsworthiness because it's interesting. We haven't written about it yet. We don't know about this thing happening yet, so we want to know about it. An interesting thing is that you encode that feature as being surprising. So it's a way to operationalize that abstract problem. So as I mentioned before, this idea has been, it has a history. It existed for 15 years now, and it was called a topic detection and tracking program that has been developed by information science specialists. In this case, information retrieval. It's a sort of a niche between a subset of information science. And again, it draws these different peoples together. So it's about big data practices for me. How do we actually deal with big data, and who actually deals with big data? So this realization that traditional query-driven information retrieval is useful for content-focused queries, but deficient for generic queries, such as what happens or what's new. You can't use it for that. So concepts and methods from topic detection and tracking are being repurposed for prioritizing content. And also these bursts of activity that exist in streams, they can be used to they correspond, they sometimes do, with collective focus of attention on a particular event, topic, or site. And that's really what a lot of people are interested in that are trying to do either predictions or detections from all over the place, as I indicated earlier. So that might be about earthquakes, natural phenomena, the weather, or it might be about human phenomena, like I don't know, stock markets even, disease outbreaks, these kinds of things, elections. So both burst analysis and LDA, so latent iteration allocation, learn from previous data. They incorporate what they know. So it's relevant to store data, and it's relevant to store as much data as possible in order to improve the accuracy of inferential statistics. So prediction, again, is something, you do inference. Prediction is sort of the larger set, and inference is a specific way of doing that. So it popularizes a particular idea of prediction. So just to sort of collect a few of these conclusions about the things that I've now just been saying. Event detection as a mode of prediction and prediction as a mode of detection. So these two things, they are the same. Prediction is done as a detection task, and detection is done as a prediction task through inference. And it popularizes a set of methods by doing that. So what matters in big data is not merely the size. That's the second point, the critique of the idea of colossal data, right? It's not just about the size, but actually also about the level of granularity and the fact that that data comes in continuously. It's a stream. And it facilitates decision-making in the level of the individual. It can be a human, or it can be an individual star in the sky if you're an astronomy scholar. So latent structures are simultaneously dependent and independent of the content. They are independent because it's about the structure, not the content, but it's dependent as well because if it's talking about something entirely different, then the keyword matching algorithm will not work. So it's about the keywords, but not necessarily about the content of those keywords. It's an interesting distinction again. And these methods are ultimately performative of the social worlds that they first describe. So by implementing these techniques, we're also going to use them. They become they sort of are engines of these social worlds. We propose recommendations to people that you may then click on because they are proposed. So these things, they also have a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, and it's this idea that they also create their own worlds. And the filter bubble is just one example of that. So how and why is it that some concepts and methods from particular historical programs are sort of drawn together in this space? Why is that? Why do they travel? And that's, I hope that we can discuss these things later, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Fernando, for a pretty dense overview into differences between structure and content, between various events that might happen, let's say, in a physical space, but may also happen in a data space. I had a question about that, actually. If not anybody else has a question first. Okay. You mentioned two kinds of events. I actually thought you were going to say something else. First, I should say, I think this was an introduction to the idea of information design. Which was my question in the beginning, actually. So, out of data, information is designed, and actually you showed us a couple of methods by which this is done. So, thank you for that. But my question was about events, actually, because there seems to be also a distinction between events as they happen in the world that we embody, physical space, or in meat space, as it's sometimes called. And events that happen inside the data sphere, which are statistical events, which are sometimes refer to events outside of that, but are also kind of, in a way, constructs, because if you didn't see them, they didn't happen. So they're kind of these events are products of ways of reading data. So, and these events, and this is where I find I'm losing it a little bit, but these events, and I think this is a matter of media dynamism in a lot of ways. These events themselves begin to cause other events. I'm thinking of this Guardian tweet streams that at some point indeed the burstiness of a certain media stream becomes an event and it becomes reported, and then people react to it. And so there you see this dynamism between social, let's say, real body events and then data events. And I'm really wondering how this is playing out for us. I think we have run. Okay, can you say something about this?
No, yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that both of them are still events, right? And it matters what the kind of methods that you use to separate the non-event from the event they shape what becomes the non-event and event. So it's about how these methods are designed. So that's why I get back to the design thing.
So it becomes totally recursive.
Yes.
So as soon as you accept something as an event, it may also be a causal agent of future events, but if you never set it to be an event, then it's also never existed.
So that's the point about this social life of the method, I would say. So if you create a method, then it also becomes productive of its own world, the thing that it proposes to describe, right?
And this is so this is, I think, very interesting. I think you're also referring to this in your talk, but this is a very interesting thing to keep kind of track of in your dealings with data, because data are not just capturing the world, they're also constructing whole other worlds that we may confuse for the world. So
yeah, it's this notion of plasticity, I would say, right? Yeah. It's all made culture.
Thank you very much. I hope we can get into this more deep in the discussion, although we're already running a bit out of time.
We're now going to watch a short movie, You, the World and I, I've got by John Raffman. Yeah, I always take the wrong paper for that. John Raffman. There we go.
I don't have one single photograph of her. Even though we spent the better part of our youth together, traveling the globe. We hiked Machu Picchu. We crossed the Atacama Desert. We visited the Great Pyramids of Giza. And yet, I have not one photo of her. She never let anyone take pictures of her. She said she would rather think of things the way they were in her memory. The truth is, I think she believed a picture could steal your soul. Or something like that. Now that she's gone, I wish more than ever I had some sort of record of our time together, something to grab onto, a proof of our love, but I have none. Well, that's not entirely true. There is one photo. Looking at the Mayan pyramids from space, when I remembered something that I had tucked away deep inside the recesses of my mind. A fleeting image came to me. Long before she disappeared from my life, we had taken a hotel on the eastern coast of Italy. I was watching her from our first floor balcony when a Google car drove by. I recalled chuckling to myself at the time. Someone had finally succeeded in taking her photograph. For weeks I tried to remember the address of the hotel. I spent days upon days at the computer, cruising up and down the coast. And then I found her. That Google Street View image began to replace all other memories of her. It seemed to contain our whole relationship, but yet it was so blurry. I made it my mission to find another image of her. Each street view was a sphere. Each little sphere contained a potential memory, a possibility of finding her. But I would lose my mind if I were to try to look through every one of them. So I started to narrow it down. to every apartment we had lived in over the course of our relationship, spending 6 hours every day searching for another accidental capture of her. Perhaps I would find us together, holding hands walking along a promenade, or sitting together on a park bench somewhere. But I found nothing. And in this day and age, I was sure it was impossible to disappear completely. My search became more and more abstract. At times, I felt as if I were looking for her image in the very landscape itself. I started to believe the Earth was a giant brain and I was tapped into all its nerve centers. Yet she still eluded me. I wonder where she is right now. I heard a rumor once that she was on a little island off the coast of Turkey, studying pre-Socratic fragment recently discovered by a team of Dutch archaeologists in an ancient catacomb. I loved that photo. It was a record of our life together. One day I returned to her image, and it was gone.
Then now I will take the other microphone. Last speaker of today is Kristoffer Gansing, who's director of the Transmediale Art Festival in Berlin. As a curator, he researches the intersections of media, art and activism. And in his talk, he will also take a more political stance to what we have listened to before, although none of your talks was without political implications, but you didn't address them specifically. But I'm sure Kristoffer Gansing will do so. The talk is called The World... Sorry, I messed up my notes. It's my fault entirely. Excuse me, please, Kristoffer. I can't. Yes, please. I'm sorry for this. I wrote it down, but in the wrong paper. Kristoffer Gansing, take it away. Yeah.
It's on my first slide anyway. And it comes into the picture a bit later in the talk. So thanks, Lars, for the introduction, and thanks to Impakt for arranging this great festival with this really good theme, Future of the Past. I've enjoyed engaging with it. So in this talk, I will work through some of the main aspects of this theme, and of course relate to my own work as kind of media researcher and artistic director of the Transmediale Festival, and the edition that we did of that this year called Capture All. I hope I'll stick to the time now that we're late, but probably it will go a bit over time. I'd like to begin with us considering these two images side by side. So they represent two different world events that in seemingly contradictory ways have redefined our relationship to data collection. So on one side, of course, we have the the left disappearance of the Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, which mysteriously vanished from all communication flows on the 8th of March 2014. Simultaneously, there were still major new reports coming out, as there still is, of course, of the documents leaked by the former NSA worker turned whistleblower Edward Snowden about mass surveillance. And of course, these events seem to contradict each other. The NSA leaks revealed that we are potentially always watched over, and that nations and their populations all over the globe are kind of subject to this bulk data collection and analysis. Before Snowden, big data was actually just a kind of a buzzword within the IT businesses, and after Snowden it became more mainstream and even perhaps household term. And the disappearance of flight MH370, however, seemed perhaps somewhat anachronistic after we learned about programs like PRISM and X-Keyscore. So how can it be that on the one hand, everybody is potentially constantly monitored and rendered transparent to security agencies and corporations, yet it was impossible to track down an entire Boeing 777 with over 200 people on board? And I think the answer lies not so much in the fact that actually aircraft kind of communication and technology needs to be updated, but I think we need to turn the perspective into a perspective where the flight MH370 and Snowden exist in a kind of logical correlation to one another and not in contradiction. So the important lesson to be learned from both incidents are eventually more about the limits of big data than about what it actually does. It's a well-known fact, of course, that bulk surveillance programs, such as those revealed by Snowden, have not led to the interception of any major terrorist plots, if even to the prevention of any kind of major crime at all, as the former NSA officer William Binney stated at this year's Transmediale Festival, is under the theme of Capture All, as I already mentioned. He said that actually you don't find the needle in the haystack by making the haystack bigger. And this is what, in his opinion, the collected all principle behind bulk surveillance, data surveillance programs, what they do. They create this kind of unwieldily huge data sets to which no effective handling procedure yet applies. And similarly, when confronted with the mystery of the Malaysian Airlines flight gone missing, authorities and companies turned to the promise of big data to solve the problem. So an early player here was the company Digital Globe, who reportedly owns 5 satellites that on a daily basis captures more than 1 million square meters of high-resolution footage of the Earth. And shortly after the Malaysian airline incident, Digital Globe launched a crowdsourcing campaign to engage users then to analyze this vast footage and look for possible traces of debris in the ocean. In a quote here, a spokesperson of the company said that, I quote, 6.3 million users were involved in the effort, looking at more than 485 million map views, which accounted for more than 120,000 square meters of imagery. And he added that more than 6.7 million features had been tagged by the crowd so far. And of course, until today, only one single piece of debris has been found, and that was not by the way of this crowdsourcing campaign or any kind of information technology. It simply floated to land. So it seems as we are back here in the needle and haystack problem, and that indeed both the Snowden leaks and the flight MH370 incident point to one of the major blind spots of big data, which is its very functioning as a supposedly precise means of processing colossal amounts of information. In fact, I think one could be tempted to draw the perhaps somewhat paradoxical conclusion that with ever more precise data measuring, we seem to be getting increasingly imprecise measures. So this does not apply to the imprecision of electronic mass surveillance only. I'm thinking perhaps also of more kind of other pervasive contemporary phenomena, from misdirected drone strikes to failed market predictions, or something much more mundane, as some of the aspects been discussed here by the other speakers, social media analysis, mistargeted online ads, which are based on crude life and pattern analysis, for example. You can object, of course, and say that in the future, ever more precise algorithms will take care of the processing of most data, thus eradicating human error. Of course, we know already algorithms are already the essential building blocks of so-called big data. But I have a hard time believing that even if they get more precise and effective, which they certainly will do, this kind of supposed correlation between technical precision and a culture of imprecision, I have a hard time believing that that will somehow go away. So if now comes the title that I had at the beginning slide, a very long title, The World is an Archive, and it's the end of the world as we know it. So I had this kind of introductory analysis of limits of big data and the emergence of a culture of imprecision, perhaps relating directly to this theme of the future of the past, and particularly the topic of this panel dealing with data. With this title saying that the world is an archive, I'm perhaps then obviously referring to this process of datafication that concerns how our globally networked systems of data collection and mass computation is rendering the world in data. I think it's important perhaps to take a break and reflect on the kind of historical context of that, also how it relates to other previous concepts such as the paradigm of mediatization, which talks about how media then perhaps merely captured and represented the world. The difference being now, I think that data is not just treated as a content carrier, but also increasingly as a kind of factual archive of various aspects of the world. And it's here I would like to also think that in some way it also is undoing the world as we know it. As datafied reality seems to become granular, it opens up to the modular construction of all kinds of alternative worlds within it, as also Fernando was speaking about in his talk. So high-frequency trading, financialization would be one obvious example here of a kind of layer of algorithmically processed data streams that has a profound impact of our lived reality. But it often appears to us, this kind of datafied economy, as either simply out of control, or at least the ways through which it can be co-shaped seems very imprecise and opaque. So in order to understand this process of datafication and what they do to our concepts of the past, present, future, and how to deal with it, I would suggest we need to go back to cybernetics, information science, of course, but and its root in cybernetics as the scientific foundation of this entire development. And this goes way beyond 15 years. And probably before that too. You should never make these kind of statements. Now I come with the real history, but here's one attempt anyway. So Norbert Wiener, the so-called founding father of cybernetics, he said in his famous foundational book on cybernetics from 1965, here's a quote, "To predict the future of a curve is to carry out a certain operation on its past." Already in the 1940s, under the umbrella of teleological mechanisms, he was working with other researchers to describe this function of feedback. As this was a concept geared towards the control of the uncertain post-war future at the time, where systems of practically any kind would be seen as containing a potential for self-correction and evolution according to the constant comparison of present output with past input. Today we could look at the work of kind of cybernetically inspired media archaeologists such as Wolfgang Ernst, who also discuss how these kind of feedback processes are further intensified in the materiality of digital networked media. So today even we could say that we have a kind of new archive fever in which captured media content is constantly repurposed for new consumption. And the arche, that is the originary impulse of archival action today, I think, has moved from being the kind of, and other people like Wolfgang Ernst would probably argue similarly, moved from being the administrative and cultural memory preservation of classical archives to the algorithms of processual and networked, well, continuous archives in that sense, always in a state of transmission. So here, this constant cybernetic dynamic of feedback between old and new data seems to have been, seems to be replacing the bureaucratic ordering of the past as a static entity, so that also technically speaking, the past has become operational in the cybernetic regime. And I guess it's no coincidence that Norbert Wiener was writing his texts, actually publishing some of this work at exactly the same time as George Orwell's 1984, where the parties slogan goes, and I quote, "Who controls the past controls the future, who controls the present controls the past." So this dystopia of Orwell's 1984 was conceived during the 1940s, concurrently with the utopia of the cybernetic model, which turns to data of the past as a resource for controlling the present and managing the uncertainties of the future. So in a way, Wiener's work establishes cybernetics in a way that uncannily recalls the 1984 vision of a state that tries to eradicate all possible kind of unstable or subversive elements that then usually arises out of the past. The past then as a space from which you can normally construct multiple interpretations of the present. A lot of us been made of this connection between cybernetic control and the relation between that and its to surveillance and control of the future and so on. But the greatest operation of control, it seems, is actually carried out on the past. So where the past is reduced to forever being in archival mode. In short, it's transformed into a data resource. The big questions that could arise here is what this datification now is doing to us culturally, including to our sense of history, and if we still can retain some kind of agency within that. And this was the question also, what kind of blind spots are there to maybe subvert or exploit? I would like to talk a little bit about the attempts to deal with this type of discussion in the framework of this year's Transmediale Festival, which had the title Capture All, happened in the transition between January and February this year. Obviously, it dealt with topics such as the quantification of everything through digitization, data collection, and algorithmic processing. The title comes from this so-called full take or collected all paradigm, which is the goal of agencies like NSA and GCHQ, at least according to how also journalists like Glenn Greenwald described it, for example, in the book No Place to Hide. But rather than looking only at the state of digital culture somehow through the prism of mass surveillance, with this kind of polarity of the freedom of the individual versus Big Brother, Capture All tried to imply also a more broader overarching perspective on the technical drive or technocultural drive towards quantification, optimization, datafication of everything, which this idea of a full take is ultimately also depending on. I would say that this full take that we know from the Snowden NSA leaks, that's just one of the major symptoms of a bigger kind of cultural drive. And there are some underlying questions about what kind of cultural and political models of communication and technology that I think just the anxiousness about surveillance that often fails to address these. So Capture All was this attempt to look also at different motivational techniques such as gamification and self-quantification that propel us as consumers and producers to contribute data. Activities that are not at all any longer just kind of limited to specialized communities, but becoming pervasive on an everyday life basis, not only through social networks, but also through kind of new research and technology development paradigms such as the Internet of Things and the smart city. So Capture All, in that sense, looked at also the motivations that we all have for becoming cyberneticians and surveyors, but also it tried to say that that's not, of course, not only about individual choice. It's this logic of Capture All that seems to spread everywhere and at once in our societies that we need to deal with. And here, the close linkage of behavioral patterns with technological, aesthetic, as well as economic forces. One way that we tried, I will also give one artistic example, just to also say how we, a little bit more detailed, looked at this was to look at the ongoing transformation and new constellation of the domains of work, life, and play. So these streams suggest specific kind of social and cultural reconfigurations within this Capture All logic. So, for example, the intensified, or since long already ongoing, blurring of work and leisure, but now where devices or kind of, methodologies like gamification propels even play to become work, or the drive towards self-optimization, where the subject becomes a site of data collection and constant evaluation. Quickly, one of many artistic positions that could be interesting to discuss in this context. A key piece in the exhibition this year was the work of the American artist Jennifer Lynn Morone. The work is simply called Jennifer Lynn Morone Incorporated. So in this piece, she's involving her whole life in, it's kind of a work that blurs boundaries between art and life. She turned herself into a corporation whose product is the data that she's producing basically on an everyday basis, and she uses an app to track her behavior and store that data in a kind of secure way so that only the owner, that she, has access to it. Then she creates these kind of data packages that can be bought then by customers. These data packages are then structured in different kinds of categories, such as lifestyle, health, entertainment, like what she's consuming in media and so on, her financial transactions. One challenge that arises in this process, which is quite interesting conflict here, is that, of course, there's already a lot of services that she would be using that claim also rights to her data. And an interesting twist here is that since she is a company formally, such services are also kind of enacting a copyright infringement on Morone Inc.'s main product, her own data. So the product has this kind of conflictual, real aspect to it, and also it's also at the same time a bit absurd and speculative, as the artist, as she herself puts it. It demonstrates a kind of capitalism in extreme, shows what happens when corporations become or are treated as people, and also people treated as corporations. This could be one critical approach in the way that it accelerates also the current condition of digital capitalism rather than slowing it down, so that the act of resistance becomes to expose the system by exaggerating it and trying to somehow outplay it in its own rules. Okay, I'm going to be within 20 minutes. So where does this capture all logic somehow then take us? Are there actually a hope of resistance or alternatives through such kind of artistic project, activist projects? I think going back to this initial premise of kind of big data, capture all, and how it kind of is functioning in society today, I think there is very little hope to kind of overcome this machine in some kind of absolute way. That's also because the full take, I think we need to understand it as something that is actually impossible in the end. It rests on an effort that can have no end. It's probably also, it's not the goal, but it's usually posited as somehow the goal. The more data you collect, the more metadata you produce. The distinction between data and metadata is indeed anyway very kind of dubious, I think, as every data would always be a derivative of some other data. We're dealing somehow more with a procedural operation, which also like a computer game is based on a kind of looping logic and not in closure. So the control that arises is predictive, of course, and not definite. It's kind of soft control, which makes it also chillingly kind of more effective, since it tries to foreclose not the existing, but also the possible. So the full take, I call it a kind of a self-unfulfilling prophecy. It repressively maintains and manages regimes of control at the same time as it unfulfills promises of stability, transparency, security, prosperity, freedom, etc. And if you can just kind of predict that next step, reach that next goal, win that next round, beat that next end-level boss, and so forth. And maybe this impossibility in the end of the full take and the inherent futility and many failed predictions of capture all is also the entry points for critique and for constructions of some kind of other alternatives. In the abundance of information, capture itself increasingly misfires. This perpetual failure can also be exploited. If datafication is a never-ending loop, it by necessity produces blind spots, something which is not yet known, and that might become a space for intervention and for the possibility of foreclosing this foreclosure. At least this is what I draw sometimes as a common line between different tactics and strategies of somehow resistance or perhaps simply coping with capture all logic. Quantification and the world becoming archived by necessity has its limits, precisely because it is a process of delimiting. The rules of the game can be circumvented and redrawn and rerouted for different purposes. Thank you.
What do you think, Ilja? Yeah? Thank you very much, Kristoffer Gansing, for opening up perspectives that actually both inform your talk quite in a very interesting way. First, I want to question this all. You did this as well. This is a kind of a futile attempt. The all is not something that can be captured. There's always more, and any capturing leads to more metadata, which then needs to be etc. etc. There's a kind of infinity there. But also on a more let's say how to call that, pragmatic level. You pointed out that online platforms all try to achieve their actually, in a way, all operate on the fact that they all try to construct their own data sphere, which then also becomes more or less inaccessible to the other. So the all, what on this level already, what all can be captured? To what extent are these data spheres inaccessible to each other? This also goes back a bit to this underlying question of the web. Is it still there? But please, Anna. Yeah.
So yes, I do think that these social media platforms are creating their own data sets for their own purposes. So that's the logic indeed behind the infrastructure of these platforms, that indeed they're taking basic elements of the web, but then drawing it into their own systems, and thereby also then encapsulating access of what kind of value can be derived. So there are very smart ways of actually implementing themselves into what we used to call like the open web, and then encapsulating their logic or imposing their formatting logic on the open web to encapsulate it further for their own data processing. So there is such a thing still, I would argue, as the web, fortunately, but that increasingly it's being enclosed through these mechanisms that try to capture it all, in a sense, for their own economic purposes.
And those different economic actors are not kind of, they are unable to penetrate each other. This is the kind of the logic on which they operate. Like, once it's in Facebook, it's no longer in Google. Once it's in Google, it's no longer in Facebook, or what?
It's not an exclusion situation, so everyone is trying to derive, for example, value from those links. But you also see that, of course, each platform has its own strategies, but they're also collaborating in a way. So Facebook and Twitter are using, for example, the same markup language to actually add extra metadata to the web that they can then use to incorporate into their platforms. So they're creating meta standards together. But then, of course, that's different than the open web logic, where we would have like open standards. And this one is owned by Facebook, and Twitter cooperates with it because, of course, they can also fetch value from it. But so it's a competing space, but they also try to cooperate, which goes against the logic of open standards and the open web.
Thank you. Kristoffer, so the NSA is basically the party that, at least that's where this term capture all comes from. You pointed out to the basic kind of inevitable fallibility of this idea. There's no all to be captured. But to what extent, I know that the NSA works with Google, this I know, but is the NSA like on equal footing with all these big platforms? And so that's one question. Like, this is a very political power structure dealing question. And then the other question is, to what extent, even if they were, to what extent are they developing concepts and tools to overcome this fallibility of this all, so to kind of to reduce the or enhance the chance of finding needles, not haystacks, of course, needles. Yeah.
Well, I think it was the director of the NSA, which one I don't remember now, but who claimed some years ago that you need the haystack in order to find the needle.
Yes.
So this shows a little bit the direction they're thinking in, which is also this kind of, it's collecting the data for its own sake somehow, creating this security kind of mindset and culture, which is perhaps the capture all. Capture all is not, it's a word play that we created on collected all, capturing implying more game-like structure, capture the flag and so on. So it's not, that's something else. But
so the first was to what extent, I know the NSA works with Google. I mean, that's how they could collect the basic of what Snowden revealed. But are you aware of deals with other platforms like Facebook and Twitter and what have you?
I mean, this is not something I would like to talk about because
Okay.
I don't have enough information
Okay, yeah,
on that.
yeah.
I mean, in general, we know these corporations
Yeah.
exist, but not also NSA and. Well, the interesting part there is like also what is happening in Europe between
The
I'm
new
working in
ruling.
Germany,
Yeah.
BND, and they're
Yeah.
kind of. We know too little of that. We know a lot about the American companies cooperating with the NSA and so on.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are lots of
Yeah.
blind spots there in our knowledge. I think this old thing here is we should think about this also as kind of a mythological or just like
Yeah.
big data is kind of a mythological all that provides also kind of like an authorization almost on a government level to undertake these collections and this surveillance action.
And the other question is about the needle or the nature of those needles, and then I have to come back to your talk about, because there seemed to be, actually I was writing down when you were speaking kind of, I think there's at least 4 types of needles, types of events that we talk about, and you pointed out to another one. So one is the event that happened that you don't know about, that you try to find back, that you, and this is the example of the disappearing airplane. We know it happened, but we don't know what. There is an event, but we can't find it, so we have to look for it. So, but we can kind of frame this in a particular way, and then all kinds of problems suddenly appear that. The tools were not constructed to kind of construct these kinds of events. So all of a sudden we have an event that we know is there, but is invisible. So that's one. Then the events that are known and that are also captured. So you can actually instigate a very distinct query. So I want to look for a keyword or the series of a structure in a tweet stream, for instance, that happened, and so you can find it, you can look for it. And then there's the other kind of the events that are found, although you didn't have the kind of serendipitous or surprising, you pointed out, things that you didn't know were there but suddenly appear in the data. And then you have this interesting question, like to what extent are these things events? And once you acknowledge them and you articulate them, they may cause other kinds of events to happen, which is a kind of interesting move. And then you have the other events that are constructed, that are maybe not found, so not discovered, but are by consciously applying a method, suddenly they become an event. And so, and there seems, I don't have a clear question of this, but I find this all quite, it is ultimately a question of, there's all kinds of mysterious agencies inside the human, or human agency, that are part of all of these, although they seem to be artifacts of algorithms, etc., but it seems to be very much something that we make. It's a very...
I would say the interesting thing here is, again, this notion of plasticity. So what we are talking about is made objects and made methods. And because they are made, they introduce their own political distinctions between things. So this idea of, for example, the new and the retrospective event, that's a product of the methods that you use, because, what do you actually do with it? Why would you find the new event, and how do you do that? This surprising feature, this value that you apply to something that is new, is a method for doing that. You can also think of a different thing, like the occurrence of a particular keyword, and then you would flag that person that tweeted that keyword, because the keyword is you can't say that word, it's taboo or something. So flagging is another mechanism by which you would sort of filter, prioritize individuals over others. So there are these different methods for doing these techniques. So that, I would say, shifts the political question to the level of the technique. That's, I think, the key point there. Yeah. So this plasticity is important because the political is located there.
Yeah. So and now we enter kind of this topic of profiling, and this is about, in a way, constructing events. So it's kind of, it's, I would say, often disguised as we are finding a pattern, but actually the pattern is an effect of the way the search was constructed. So the tool by which the pattern was found. So, and then we end up come down to this question of, to what extent can we construct tools? Can we be aware of our, let's say, the choices and the discriminations that go into the tools? Like, how do you? This is a question to all of you, and this is also a question of like freeing it up for yourself. This is freeing up rooms for critique. Like, how can you? To what extent can you become aware of the tooling and the constructing of the tooling as the way to produce the events? And what can be your stance on this?
Maybe Kristoffer first. Yeah. You nodded first. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. It's a very big discussion.
Yeah. Sorry for that, but we're capturing all.
Wow. The question of tools, right?
The question of like the awareness of the tools as that generate the event, and then how can you escape that dynamics then producing events that become causal agents themselves? Yeah.
A basic problem we are facing is this kind of overbelief in statistical evidence, and data as kind of evidence of the world rather than constructions.
Yeah.
Of course, it correlates to something that is happening, but it's also has this, as already actually well formulated, has this kind of doubleness to it, that it's also then acting back on the world. But I think we're seeing more and more like a kind of very much economically motivated drive towards really accepting data in this quantified self-movement, for example. This kind of almost idea of the body as transparent to data. And it's completely congruent with a kind of certain capitalist super precarious work culture that is also more and more the case. And I mean, yeah, I'm not so sure that even more kind of refined information science into how this is working is in the end, making people more aware of these tools. We need also something, something else, some kind of cultural, also beyond the mass surveillance debates that make people more engaged in this kind of questions, really, because it's about like how we at all create knowledge today.
Yeah. So what kind of thing could we need to create this awareness of a possible distance between a data and an event, that there's no one-to-one correlation, if you like? Yeah. What things would we need there?
Yeah, I think also, I'm not sure if I emphasized that, but this idea of machine learning also exists in two sort of forms. One of them is unsupervised and the other one is supervised. So in the case of unsupervised machine learning, you don't see what the machine is doing. It's just calculating and it's just sort of categorizing stuff statistically, purely statistically. Yeah. But if you have empirical data, if you are dealing with, let's say tweets about real world events, then what often happens is you use unsupervised methods because these things also get misclassified. They make errors. These machines make errors. So there's people involved making decisions whether this keyword should go into this category or into that category, whether this person is a person of interest or not. So these moments are extremely human, and because we are dealing with empirical data, they are very important to consider. And you can, I think, also make these processes much more publicly visible. What sort of decisions are made to train these methods, because that's the world state that they are going to produce.
So your suggestion is to become, it's the last question, I want to ask it to Anna as well. So you're suggesting that we should be more public, a bit more transparent about the ways in which machines learn, and like by what data sets they are trained, so what results they may produce.
Well, ideally, I would say
no?
yes. I would say yes, but it's impossible. I mean, it's practically impossible. You cannot. It's just practically hard to do.
Maybe it's somebody else. I want to ask this last question to Anna as well. So, what do you think we need? What would be needed to open up this space for human agency in this capture-all logic, and in this very unclear relationship between data and event and etc. etc. So how can we open up this space a little bit? What would be needed to do that?
Maybe then I'll also return to the first way you phrased the question, because it actually connects to what has just been said, like how methods and tools and algorithms actually shape also what's coming next, and how they're informed also by human beings. So, for example, in the case of Facebook, there was here I would like to mention research done by my bachelor students who actually wanted to investigate to what extent, for example, these algorithms that are informed and shaped by human beings also may be seen as discriminating, for example. So when you're talking about how can we actually see what is being produced by these kind of tools, which was the first question, for example, what they did, they created like 2 different profiles of exactly the same people. The only thing that was different between them was their gender. So one was female and they had the exact same interest as the male. So they all liked the same stuff. And then at one point, they noticed that all the group suggestions they got, all the advertisement they got, for all the females, it geared towards pregnancy and babies, and for the men, it geared towards going to the gym and all kind of other things. So here there was here they could actually detect that the algorithm made particular decisions for them based on their gender, because everything else was exactly the same. So this is what is a strand in new media studies, what is called auditing algorithms, where you try to derive actually methods to audit what these tools are doing. So this is also
what you're saying as well.
So this is in relation to what has previously been said. Like we can try to derive methods to actually test the outcomes of these kind of systems, and this is one very basic way to do that.
I'm afraid time has run out. This would be extremely interesting to continue, but maybe we have to do it elsewhere. Is that an option?
I'm sorry that for this particular panel we have run out of time for questions from the audience, but I do welcome everybody here who is provoked by these ideas and statements to just join us for the rest of the day, maybe even speak to the panelists upstairs over coffee. I think the last points raised here by actually in this conversation point to basically the twin sister of this event in like a temporal mirror. Tomorrow around the same time at 1 we'll have Colossal Data Meets the Future, which will particularly focus on the forecasting value or said value, for example, in predictive policing, and how these predictive analytics actually learn, because they learn from people, not from themselves, right? So I'd like to thank you for joining us. I'd like to thank Anne, Klaas, and Kristoffer and Fernando so much for your contributions, very valuable to these discussions. Thank you for attending, and stick around for the next program. At 3, I'll have a conversation with Tobias Revel in the foyer upstairs. Thank you all, and thank you.